Hi, my name is Dr. Larry Force, and I'd like to, first of all, welcome you here today with two of my dear friends, Jim Ball and Kathryn Sajak, and we go back a long way. Jim and I have known each other for, I don't know, probably about 14 years, and probably about 5 years ago, Jim, myself, and another colleague and friend, Dave Brinkerhoff, we formed the National Organization of Adult Addictions and Recovery. It's a nonprofit to really support people in adulthood who are going through the recovery process. Based upon a theory of dimensionality, it's a here and now theory. It's the idea of, it's not a question of growing up, it's really a question of growing out, growing in and out. You know, the idea of change. And change is possible at any time. It's not something that, there's nothing wrong with 7 years of psychotherapy, but change doesn't require 7 years of psychotherapy. You know, and the fact is that there are avenues available to all of us today. And one of the avenues is based upon a practice that we call dimensional solution-based treatment. We created an intervention called Intersections. And what now we're here to talk about today is a module on spirituality in the Intersection, program. You're going to really like it. And it's not something that you have to wait to use. You can use immediately. And it really is a question of attitudinal change. And like I said, it can happen immediately. It's a practice, and we've learned how to practice chaos, many of us, and now we learn how to practice predictability. So with that, what I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce my dear friend and colleague, Jim Ball.
Thanks, Larry. Yes, so I'm Jim Ball. I'm the coordinator of peer services over at MHA, and I'm a person in long-term recovery. What that means for me is that for the past 25 plus years, I've been in sustained recovery from substance and mental health. I have some depression and anxiety that I deal with day at a time. We talk about this just to let you know that, we've walked down some of the same pathways that you may have. And, it's through self-care, taking care of ourselves, learning about some new lifestyle changes that help me focus on recovery. And that's what Intersections is about. It's about taking care of ourselves a day at a time, changing our lifestyle, putting in some new behaviors to substitute for some of the things that weren't working in our recovery. So Intersections, what the Intersections program promotes is staying on your recovery plan, whatever that is for you. This is a person-centered program, and what we say is that we help stay on the recovery plan. We want to stay out of services, whether it's a community residence or an ER or just having to return to services. Let's make this the last time we have to do that, and to try to achieve some success back in the family and community. So the Intersections is trying to promote these things, staying on a recovery plan, staying out of services, and success back in the family and community, which is the, really what we hear from you are the ways that we can really gain independence and live a more fulfilled life. And to that end, today, as Larry mentioned, we're going to talk about spirituality. And we have a longtime friend of ours, Kathryn, with us, someone whose spiritual practice I really try to follow. I try to. We have a saying in the AA program. You stick with the winners. This is a person whose path I want to follow. So, Kathryn, I'll let you take it, do the rest of the intro on yourself.
Thanks, Jim. Those are some very big shoes to fill. I think of myself as just another banana in the bunch, which is something that I learned in AA. I'm no better and no worse than anybody else. But I do know that I really depend upon a regular spiritual practice to stay healthy and to stay fit. And it's such an important part of recovery. So I'm very happy to be able to talk about that today and share whatever it is that I've learned about that um, with all of you, whoever might be listening to this video. Uh, and change is a constant. So spirituality is an add-on. It's something that I have over the years added on my understanding of and my spiritual practices. And I'd like to share a little bit about that. I remember hearing a fellow at a recovery meeting, a 12-step meeting, say that he used to think that spirituality was about having the biggest out-of-body experience he could. But today he thinks about it as being the best person that he can. So that impressed me, and it struck me that one's concept of spirituality can change, and as one's concept of spirituality changes, so does one's practice of spiritual matters have to change accordingly. And Jim and I were having a little conversation before we started about the great varieties of spiritual practices that are available to people in recovery. I've had the great honor of being able to lead some people in early recovery through guided meditations at the recovery houses that are run by MHA. And it's always been an experience that I come away from thinking that I've gained far more than the people who were there supposedly learning from what I taught them. And what I really have learned is that people in recovery often have a background, a spiritual background that helps them in early recovery. And the psychologist Carl Jung once described an alcoholic as a man looking for God in a bottle. So the great thing about recovery is we put the plug in the jug and we find out that we're free to explore spirituality in a number of different ways. So I just would like to mention that my current practice of spirituality, which I engage in with my clients, it's kind of a cooperative practice. And I know I've told Larry about it, and I was telling Jim a little bit about it. It has to do with listening to music. Listening to music is a form of meditation for many people. It is for me. It's a centering experience. It's also an experience that when I share other people's music, it's kind of a gateway into their soul. And I recently attended a workshop on using music to assist people in dealing with COVID. And one of the statements that was made in that workshop, which I agree with wholeheartedly, is when you listen to music, you become a better listener in general. So what I've done is I've assembled music from the people who are my clients, and I've asked them to submit to me at least 3 songs that have been important to them or emblematic to them or anthems or that move them. And I try to listen to one of them before I have a session with them. I feel like this is a way of becoming attuned to their emotional needs and to their spiritual needs. And one of the things I've found is that this has really greatly increased the intimacy of the therapy session. And it's an easy thing that anybody can do. Anybody can ask another person, tell me 3 songs that are important to you, and then listen to them as a way of becoming tuned into that person's soul, if you will. I also have to own that this is not a completely original idea with me. Many years ago, I got my master's degree at Boston College, and I always thought of it as being a pretty parochial place. It's run by Jesuits, and it doesn't get too much more parochial than that. But I used to like to go to workshops there after I graduated because I have grandchildren in Boston. So if I went up to Boston, I could spend the day at BC listening to some topic that had to do with mental health and then have dinner with my grandchildren. So I went to this one workshop on spirituality and mental health, being pretty convinced that what I was going to hear about might have had to do with saying the rosary. It might have had to do with knowing something about the saints. But with my closed mind, I went anyway. And what I found was it was one of the most spiritually opening experiences I ever had. The leader of the breakout workshop I was in was a fellow who was a professor of religion there by the name of John McDar. And he also is a therapist. And someone asked him once, how did he prepare for a therapy session? And he said, well, I sit in silence and I read a poem. So he read a beautiful poem by E.E. Cummings that I'm going to share in the worksheet. I won't I won't bore you with a poetry recitation today, but there'll be printed material about this coming down the pike. He said, so I sit in silence and I read a poem. So I kind of piggybacked his idea of sitting in silence and reading a poem with the current idea about using music to help people deal with COVID. So I have to give him credit for that original idea of just listening. There's a quote I want to kind of slip in also that I heard a long time ago. When you know how to listen, everyone is the guru. So I have worked over the years on becoming a better listener, and I think I still have a long way to go. But I do try and practice that because, and this is what Jim and I were talking about, there are many different ways of practicing spirituality. Jim was saying that sometime for him, it might involve going to church. It might involve saying affirmations. It might involve just sitting quietly. But the common denominator of all of them is the ability to get quiet inside. And I think that that's something that's particularly challenging for people in recovery, particularly in early recovery, but the rest of us can get all squirrely in our heads too. I know it happens to me frequently. So it's really important for me to have an armament of a variety of spiritual things that I can practice. Sometimes it is sitting in silence. Sometimes I even find running a meditative experience for myself, and the aforementioned listening to music. And sometimes what I've taken to lately is with my clients, I often will sit and listen to a pre-recorded meditation and then discuss afterwards how it affected them, whether they feel it will be useful, what other resources are available for them to explore, if they would like to continue to explore that in future sessions. So that's a real potpourri of my ideas about spirituality. And so at this point, I think I just would like to be silent and do a little listening. So I'm going to ask you guys to respond to all that stuff I just threw out.
When I listen to you, and I love listening to you. I mean, we're dear friends, and I really do love your insight and your common sense and your grounded responses. When I was listening to you, the thought that came to mind was this work by this fellow named Eugene Gendler, who I studied years ago at the New School down in the city, doing graduate training in psychology. And what he talked about is the frozen hole, WHOLE. He's a Gestalt psychologist, and he was promoting this frozen hole. And he said in a therapeutic intervention exchange, most change occurs when there's complete silence. So, somebody comes in for therapy, and we've all been either providers of or receivers of therapeutic support. And the people that we're presenting to and reaching out to today are people that are searching. They're seekers, just like ourselves, trying to be the better us, better you. And that whole idea of silence sometimes gets overlooked. Whether it be a practice or whether it be something that you come across during the course of the day. I have now started to incorporate into my daily routine certain routines before I get out of bed in the morning. And one of it is being quiet for a couple minutes. The other is giving an affirmation. This is going to be a great day. I don't have any scientific data to share with anybody. But all I know is that by saying those types of affirmations, by structuring it, I have a better day. And I don't care if it's a placebo effect. It works for me. And I think that, as you're out here sharing your experience, strength, and hope, what are you saying? Hey, this practice of spirituality, of going here to, Boston, going to listen to this guy read a poem, and now we catch up to you years later, and what are you doing? You're listening to music, it's almost like a channeling thing, because you're asking people to send you, before they really see you that day, the music that really reverberates with them. Good stuff.
There's one thing I kind of left out that I told Jim I wanted to reference. There's a book that was recommended to me called Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. And it was a very, very special experience to have this book recommended to me. it was actually recommended by a surgeon who operated on me and saved my life 25 years ago, and whom I chanced to meet in a random kind of way at a lecture at Vassar College. And I had the opportunity to say to this woman, thank you for saving my life. And she's such a humble, quiet, modest person. She said to me, well, if I hadn't done it, somebody else would have, which is absolutely untrue. She was a master doctor, a master surgeon. I developed an infection in the site of the incision, and she called in a specialist who prescribed antibiotics, and I got better. I heard a story about someone else who had another doctor who didn't do that. He said, I'm the doctor, I can treat this. And he treated it with the wrong antibiotic and the patient died. So I had to tell her that story. And we ended up becoming friends. And she ended up revealing to me that she's been in recovery for 19 years. So we started to go to a couple of meetings together. But she's the one who recommended this book to me. And I think the whole idea of a spiritual practice beginning from the ability to be quiet was something that now, in retrospect, I think that her ability as a surgeon was really affected by her ability to become quiet enough to become teachable, to learn the techniques that saved my life. I don't know if all of that makes sense, but I also used this book recently. I had a young patient who came to me, and she has a great deal of anxiety, and her anxiety centers around being an introvert. Because really, when you think about it, our world rewards extroverted people. We have to have classes where students participate. There's a grade for participation, and if you don't raise your hand and speak up, you get points off. And this young lady had a difficult time doing that. So not only did I recommend this book, but there's, on the inside cover, there's a manifesto for introverts. And some of the things on it are priceless. Like, there's a word for people who are in their heads too much, thinkers. And solitude is a catalyst for innovation, which I think is something that really speaks to what we've been talking about previously about spirituality and creativity. The next generation of quiet kids can and must be raised to know their own strengths. And I'm not going to read all of them, but love is essential. Gregariousness is optional. And the very last one, which is a quote from Mahatma Gandhi, is, in a gentle way, you can shake the world. So I think all of those are kind of really spiritual axioms that are worth having another look at. And I was very glad to recommend this book to this girl, but more than that, to her parents, who were the ones who push her to be more extroverted rather than accepting that this is a quiet kid with some quiet strengths. So it's important, I think, for all of us to recognize that we can find strength in our quiet places as well.
Great, great stuff, Kathryn. When we did one spirituality module during the fall, and we looped in the creativity a little bit. And I wonder if that might be something we could explore, talking about, especially with the group that we're talking to, what creative things you might have been successful at or enjoyed in the past, and what are some of the things you're looking at now and to the future? How does that creativity, spirituality, I don't know, maybe you could talk about that just a little bit.
Well, I'll talk a little about it. I attend a meeting every week that takes place, actually it's centered in Boston, but of course it takes place on Zoom now. That's for artists in recovery. And the term artist is used very broadly. And when I was invited to attend this meeting for the first time, I said, I don't know why they're asking me. I'm not an artist, maybe a BS artist from time to time. But as a result of being part of this meeting on a regular basis, I've not only come to uncover some sources of creativity of my own that have lain dormant for many years, but actually to see that I have been creative in my recovery all along. And I never stopped to really notice it. I never gave myself credit. So this is a place to go to examine the relationship between creativity and recovery on an ongoing basis. And there are people in that meeting who, like me, have really branched out. just like spirituality is an ongoing, living, changing process, so is creativity. And the person who started the meeting is a friend of Larry's and mine by the name of Woody Giesman. Used to be a drummer with a band called the Del Fuegos. And after he got sober, he opened a treatment program for people in Boston who are creative. It's called Right Turn. And his contention is that all of us are creative. We just have not found the avenue of exploring that until we put down the drink or the drug. And so he started as a musician, and he's later branched out into becoming a painter of really great talent. He's had a couple of shows up in Boston, and he's in the process of having his first book published, which is about shame and guilt. And his publisher is Simon and Schuster, so he must be pretty good at writing as well. And he's kind of my inspiration and my mentor in this whole quest to become more creative. So I just think the general point, which is to begin to explore spirituality and recovery as an avenue of creativity, and it's reciprocal, and creativity as a way of enhancing one's recovery is really, really important. I don't know what specifically I could mention. Maybe you could ask me a leading question, Jim.
Well, I'd like to add to what Jim was saying, what you were saying. I had a conversation with somebody who I've known for a long period of time, and not in any type of formal recovery, but this person was completely out of control early on when I knew him. And now we catch up to him, and he's not that out of control. And we were talking, and he said to me, which I thought was very insightful, he said, the first half of our life, we go out of our way trying to kill ourselves. And the second half of our life, we go out of our way trying to figure out ways to stay alive. And when you think about that, it's tied in with, a lot of the theories. You talk about Jung, he says the second half of life is all about the search for meaning. We've all been in spots in our lives that we're not beating our chest saying, look how proud we are of this. Life is full of change. And if you are watching this, what is this telling you? In the moment of silence, stop and congratulate yourself that you're seeking, you're looking. You didn't just hear this, turn it off and go out into, continuing with aberrant, addictive, ritualistic, OCD types of, destructive behaviors. You're stopping, you're listening, you're thinking. And you're thinking, who are you listening to the most? Yourself. And you know that change is necessary. Change might be very required based upon your own internal thoughts, those of your family, those of a court system, those of a job, but change has arrived. And I think that, when you're talking about those simple patterns, just breathing in, this, I'm sure that you're going to go, when we talked about, the introduction today, one of the things we talked, there's a lot of ways that I could introduce you. And one of them is expert, but I don't want to go there because that brings up a whole nother thing. But you talked about a practice meditator, and one of the things that I think would be beneficial if you could demonstrate what that really looks like in your own life, not, 15 minutes on a yoga mat, but how do you go about positioning yourself, posturing yourself? Maybe you could lead us even through, a little mini clip of what that actually looks like and feels like.
I'd be happy to do that, but with the caveat that it looks different on any given day. I might, like Jim, have a variety of spiritual experiences at my fingertips, and what I need today will not be what I need tomorrow. So I learned to kind of tailor my spiritual awareness and my spiritual practice to what's going on with me in the moment. So what I'd like to try and do is maybe organize very spontaneously a guided meditation around letting go of resentment. Because guess what? I've been feeling some resentment lately. So this is as much to help me as it is to help anybody else. And if it helps anybody else, great. But I know it's going to help me a lot. So we're going to find a nice, comfortable place to sit, and we're going to keep our feet on the floor and our back straight in the chair, but not too stiff. We're going to get comfortable and let our hands rest wherever they're comfortable. And we're going to close our eyes for a moment and relax and just breathe in and out, paying attention to where we feel our breath. Could be in our nostrils or in our lungs, could be in our belly. Just tune into your breath, just a natural breath. No reason to change it for any reason. And feel your breath in your whole body. Become aware of breath as a sensation that's giving you life. Notice how when one breath ends, another breath begins. And as you breathe in the sunlight of the Spirit, and you breathe out all negativity, you notice your whole being filling with light. Divine light, light that your higher power is offering you today. And you see yourself as a being completely bathed in beautiful, pure white light, which is the energy of the universe. And now, if you will, take a moment in your mind's eye to see the image of someone with whom maybe you're not quite right. Maybe you've been annoyed with this person. Maybe they've said or done something that offends you or irritates you. And I'd like you to take a moment to send the light that surrounds you to also surround that other person. So now you see them bathed in the same divine light that you are enjoying. Take a moment to hold them in your mind's eye, bathed in this beautiful light. And perhaps you notice that they have an angry look on their face or an annoyed look. They're not smiling at you. So you take a few steps closer to them and closer and closer. And as you approach them, you open your arms and you offer them a hug, an embrace of forgiveness, an embrace of letting go of all negative thoughts or feelings, any grudge you might be holding, any resentment that might be building. And you just offer to put your arms around them. And they're taken aback at first, but then they accept your offer. Yes, I would like a hug. So you put your arms around this person and you're sharing this beautiful light. And all of a sudden, you feel your resentment toward them lifting. You feel the annoyance that you've had toward them evaporating. And you stand there in the realization that the white light that you've shared with them is love, pure love, the love of one human being to another, a fellow traveler, a struggler along the way, just like you. They are just like you. And you stand there basking in the warmth of your love for them and your love for yourself and your love for all that is good in the universe. And offer yourself some appreciation for having done this exercise, for having tried your very best to let go of a resentment and become a better version of yourself. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes and come back to the place where we are together. Thank you for sharing this with me.
Very, 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 very powerful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, yes, thank you so much, Kathryn. This is, just another time that we've spent with you that's been just so valuable for our audience, for the Intersections program, and personally. So I'm not sure exactly what to say after that to wrap up, but we will.
Can I just share one more thing with you, with all of you?
Of course.
A couple of years ago, I went down to a detention center in Texas to help people who had been incarcerated by the previous administration, women and children. And ICE forbade us from touching anybody when we were down there. And these women were often overcome with emotion as they told their stories about immigrating to this country. I had just seen the movie, Won't You Be My Neighbor, about Fred Rogers. And in it, there's a scene where Coco the gorilla, who knew sign language, goes like this, which is the international sign for I love you. So I taught all the women and children and all the other volunteers there to do this instead of touching each other, because ICE wouldn't let us touch them. They would throw you out if you touched any of these women. So I would just like to end today by saying I love you.
Great. Thank you so much. We will stay tuned for more intersections, and thanks again for being with us, Kathryn.
It's a real pleasure and an honor for me to do this. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks, Kathryn. Thanks, Jim.
You're welcome.